Hey guys, Tonic here. Last week, Bethesda and Arkane Austin flew me out to New York City to play Redfall early, and full disclosure around this, my flight and hotel were paid for by them. However, I am not required to say anything one way or the other. So in this review, I'm going to try and be as unbiased as possible and give you my honest opinion. So with that being said, here's my honest review of Redfall. Redfall is an upcoming open-world FPS game that takes place in the island town of Redfall, Massachusetts. Here the island is under siege by a legion of vampires who have blocked out the sun on the island and cut the town off from the outside world. On top of this, the vampires found help from local cultists who seem to worship the vampires. So it's your job to fight back, help survivors, and unravel the mystery behind the vampires' appearance. This game was made by Arkane Austin, the same team behind Prey and Dishonored, and I'm a huge fan of their games, so I was pretty excited when Redfall got announced. Now, I was able to play this game for about 2 hours at the event, and I believe the version of the game that we played was not the final build. It was very playable and ran pretty well and felt smooth, but it was not the exact version of the game that's going to come out on launch day. Also, we did not get to play with a brand new character. They started us off with a character that was a few hours into the game, so we already had some decent weapons, skill points, and a safe house. But getting started with the review, first off, I am not a game review channel. I cover Fallout news, make guides, and talk about lore. But I am going to give it my best shot, so for this review, I'm going to break it up into several parts and I'll add timestamps so you can skip around if you'd like. We'll talk about the story, the map, overall gameplay and combat, characters and the perk system, co-op and performance, and lastly sound design. Then I'll give my final thoughts at the end. So starting with the story, again it takes place on the island of Massachusetts, and here vampires have pushed the water away from the island and blocked out the sun, essentially cutting it off from the outside world. Now these vampires are not your traditional fantasy vampires. No, these vampires were created by science. From what I could gather, the vampires were actually made by a company called Avum. They were trying to create something to gain immortality, and something happened and it all started going south. People around the island started to go missing, dead bodies were being found, cults started to form, and eventually the sun went dark and the ocean was pushed away from the island, leaving everyone there stranded. And this is where you come in. It's up to you to take back Redfall. You can establish safe houses, do quests for survivors, and follow the main quest line to uncover the mystery of the vampires. It sort of reminds me of the movie Red Dawn, but instead of fighting Russians, you are fighting a guerrilla war against vampires. It's a really cool concept. Overall, in the 2 hours that I played, I honestly was not able to get that far in the quest line. They started us off with a mid-level character, and the quest that we started with was to investigate this mansion, and you had to find key cards and eventually find these dolls to place in a dollhouse. I played the quest for about 30 minutes or so, but I wound up finding a side quest during the main quest, and that marker was all the way across the map, so I decided that it might be better to follow the side quest and explore the map a ton, instead of just staying around this mansion. And this will take us to the overall map and environment section of the review. The map felt like it was a pretty good size. It's definitely not the size of a Fallout game or Elder Scrolls game, but it works well, and the environment is really detailed. So even though it's not a massive map, it's a good size and it's jam-packed with things to explore and check out. Also, there is fast traveling, so in this footage you can see it in action. You can fast travel to other safe houses, and I believe you can also fast travel to historical monuments that you find. And I did talk with one of the developers, and they said that there was a whole nother map. I didn't get to see it or figure out how to get to it, but I believe that we were in District 1, which is the downtown area, and District 2 is more open, so it has farms and wilderness and all of that. But as far as the overall environment goes, Arkane always makes super cool worlds to explore, and Redfall is no different. There's something neat around every corner, and I had a lot of fun just walking around the map, checking out open buildings and graffiti left by the cultists. I think the game looks really nice, and I'm stoked for it to launch so I can get back in there and keep exploring. Moving on to the overall gameplay and combat, the game has that classic Arkane Studios feel. The movement is smooth, the gunplay is snappy, it felt a lot like Deathloop if you've played that, just a really smooth FPS style game. During my time playing, I came across several different enemies. I fought tons of cultists. They sort of have these little outposts and you will find them out walking around on patrols. They tend to use assault rifles and shotguns, and every once in a while I'd run into a cultist with a megaphone, and if you fight the cultist and the megaphone dude is able to yell into it, it would raise an alarm and make the vampire gods angry. This is a pretty neat system. That bar that fills is this thing where if you cause a ton of chaos, that bar fills up and the vampire gods will send down a boss to try and kill you. I was able to fill it up once and fight him, and this is him right here. His name is Rook, and he has these lightning attacks, and he was pretty tough. Once you kill him, you get some really good loot for doing it, but if you lose, then that boss goes away and you have to try and refill that meter to spawn them again. However, if you don't want to fight them, just use stealth and lay low for a bit, and that bar will slowly decrease over time. Overall, the general combat system felt good. I really liked staking the vampires with bayonets. I thought that was super sick, just having a stake on the end of your gun. And if the vampires are far away, there were some other ranged weapons that could still do the trick. For example, I found a stake launcher, and I was sniping them from a distance. So the combat is super fun, and enemies don't really feel too weak or too tanky. And quickly touching on the stealth gameplay, sneaking around felt good. I didn't have to use it a whole lot unless I was inside of a building, but if you like to play stealthy, you definitely can, and you will have a good time doing it. The character I played had a cloak ability, and I used it a ton to sneak past large groups and get out of bad situations. So sneaking around was fun, and lastly, while talking about the gameplay, looting is a big part of this game. When you kill smaller enemies like cultists, they will drop ammo. You can also find ammo and weapons in containers around the map. At one point I climbed up to the top of a church, and in that tower I found a pretty good sniper rifle, so it is worth it to explore and check out random buildings. Now there is a rarity system, with the weapons, gold being the best, then purple, blue, and green. The character we got was pretty kitted out. They had a few gold and purple weapons. Now talking about the characters, there are 4 playable characters in the game. So first up we have Jacob Boyer. This is who I played as, and he is an ex-military sharpshooter turned private contractor. He has these really cool abilities where he can send a raven out to scout the area. He can also cloak and go invisible. And lastly, he has this ultimate where he pulls out this crazy sniper rifle and does a ton of damage. Up next, there is Remy De La Rosa. Remy used to be a combat engineer. She has a robot friend that she can send out to attack and distract enemies. She also has a C4 attack that she can throw out and detonate, and her ultimate creates a healing zone all around her. Then we have Layla Ellison, the telekinetic threat. She can create an elevator that will send her into the sky, which is pretty useful for reaching rooftops. She can also produce a psychic umbrella that will act as a shield and soak up bullets that can be fired back. And her ultimate summons her vampire ex-boyfriend to fight on her behalf. Lastly, we have Devander Crowsley. He can fire an electric javelin that will discharge and zap anybody in the surrounding area. He also has a teleportation device that he can throw out and teleport to. And his ultimate is a UV light attack. And each of these characters has their own perk tree. When we started, we had 7 perk points, I believe, to invest in your character, and you can get things that increase health, increase damage, and boost your abilities, and basic stuff like that. And all of the voice acting that I've heard so far is really good, and so far my favorite character is definitely Jacob Boyer. Now let's quickly talk about the co-op. This is something I'm really excited about because my wife and I really want to play this game together, but sadly at the event we weren't able to try it. We all had to play solo, but I was able to ask a few questions about it. So you can play with up to 4 players, and there is crossplay. We can play between Xbox and PC Game Pass, Steam, and the Epic's Game Store, so that is really cool. And I did also ask about how the game scales for the co-op. I was wondering if the enemies got harder or if maybe just more enemies would spawn, and they said depending on your party size you will see changes in the types of enemies that you encounter, how strong they are compared to solo, and the frequency of elite enemies. Now I do want to talk about the performance. We got to play on PCs with an Xbox controller, and I'm not exactly sure what hardware was inside of the PC, but I will say that every once in a while I did get some noticeable FPS drops. It seemed to happen when there was a lot of action on the screen, and when I was sprinting through areas that had a lot of buildings and stuff to load in. It wasn't horrible, but it was noticeable. It could have been due to the heat of all the PCs running right next to each other, or maybe they just didn't have the best hardware, but for the most part the game did run smoothly, and the FPS drops would go away after a few seconds. Lastly, talking about the sound design, I think it's really good. The weapons sound good, the voice acting is good, and the music is pretty solid. I also really liked how sometimes the player character would comment on stuff when entering a new area or seeing something story related. And for this part, honestly, it's probably just better to hear the game rather than hear me talk about how the game sounds. So here are a few clips with music, dialogue, gunshots, and ambient sounds.
Butterfly isn't finished.
Good lord. He lived in a bloody mansion. See a few possible entrances. Let's roll the dice, eh?
They want you dead!
Papa, I'm really cold. feel my arms.
Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Redfall. I love Arkane games, and this one is really neat. The art style is awesome, the combat is smooth, and from a little bits of the story I did get to play, it got me hooked. It's a really interesting concept, and I wanted to keep playing and go through more quests and try out different weapons and characters. Also, I was already really looking forward to buying this game before I was even invited out to this event, so it was a really cool experience getting to play something that I was actually interested in early. And I just want to give another massive thank you to Bethesda and Arkane Austin for inviting me out. It was a great experience, and I'm really stoked to play it once it comes out on May 2nd. So I hope that you enjoyed this review, and I hope that I answered some questions about the game that you might have. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate it, and as always, I'd like to give a massive thank you to all of the channel members, Asdeath93, Loopy, Joe Pervincente, Adam Steinson, Terry Lockridge, Zapper, Robert Kennard, CRM114, Theodore, Slappy Sauce, King Kittens, Omniprotus, Victrix, Argenteers, Shaky Hands Workshop, Axel, Kevin W, Anna S, Fallout McFly, Networkgate, Golty, Lanthar, Captain Awesome, Citizen Girl, Heather Henderson, Patrick Ruda, 23 Ice Fire, Jay Smith, Bowser Devil Frank, Christy Mellon Schwitz. Thank you guys so much, I love you guys, and have a great day.